and welcome to Sectors Up Close. I'm Elena Casas. Our focus today is on the British hospitality sector, and our guest is Ratman, the retail and consumer sector lead at S&P Global Ratings. Well, Britain's pubs and restaurants were allowed to fully reopen their doors from last week. But while revellers were certainly enjoying the end of all restrictions on indoor eating and drinking, the sector is still experiencing a hangover from the damage caused by the pandemic, including extended closures, labour shortages, rising costs and debt levels. Some pub operators, such as Fuller's, have axed dividends, sold off businesses and raised funds to survive. And that's left shareholders also feeling a bit under the weather. The share prices of most of the listed companies shown here have so far failed to recover fully from the losses they saw at the height of the pandemic last year. Well, for more on this, I'm now joined by S&P Global Ratings' Ratman. Hello, Raam. Thanks for joining us. Now, since pubs and restaurants started to reopen in April, everywhere I go seems packed. But is that really a real reflection? Are people going out as much as you thought they would when you forecast a strong recovery in April?
Hi, Elena, and thanks for having me, and good to be with you on the show. Indeed, look, the hospitality sector and the pubs and pub sector in the UK in particular, which is the focus of our discussion today, has been clearly hit very hard by the pandemic, and I think there are also different sides to the story. And you did mention some of the listed names. The smaller operators have been clearly hit very hard. The larger pub chains have been able to withstand the stress posed by the pandemic through government support, which has been quite extensive. And also, one more thing I'd like to point out is the vast property ownership is being a cushion for many of these pub chains, especially the larger ones. Now, in terms of recovery, as you said, yes, indeed, pent-up demand is no surprise. We did expect that, have people having, finally have a chance to socialize, get out, go to some of these hospitality venues and pubs. So there is that pent-up demand. But all in all, we do see from our estimates that the spending levels are still about 70% of pre-pandemic levels, if you look at data by end of June. So there is still a long way to go for full recovery.
What about the labour shortage? Of course, there's the short-term impact of staff isolating due to the so-called pingdemic, but the pub sector is, of course, also badly hit by a longer-term lack of workers because of Brexit, people who've returned to their home countries. So what's the impact going to be?
Yeah, these staff shortages, they come at a time when it's been a combination of reasons, and they come at a time when recovery is really important for the sector, as we just spoke about. So clearly, on one hand, it will lead to some delay in the anticipated recovery in earnings, and it does stand in a way of the hospitality sector taking full advantage of the reopenings after these long periods of closures and restrictions.
Now, in April, you predicted the sector would take up to 3 years to recover. How long do you think now?
So in broad sense, the estimate is still on track in the sense that, but again, one of the things we do see is the recovery will be uneven. We did speak about the larger managed operators. I mean, the pub chains also have leased and tenanted operators, which will have a slightly different paths to recovery. But the managed sector, which typically comprises larger pub chains, restaurants, pubs, we do feel they'll continue to fare better in the recovery phase. There will be earnings volatility across formats. There will be a lot of innovation in the sector, both from a push and pull factor, because the reason is even things like the labor shortage. One of the things it will do is it will force the sector to adopt more technology around ordering, around invoicing, around billing, around deliveries, things like that. So there's a lot of potential for the sector to innovate. And some of these would also force the sector to go from some sort of beer drinks-led, wet-led model to cater to a wider range of consumer preferences. And one of the things we do see in the recovery phase is food will be a bigger part of the offering. So to some extent, we also have trends like premiumization, which is a relatively positive trend affecting both the pub sector, the hospitality sector, but also the alcoholic beverage manufacturers. So clearly, the premiumization trend will lead to more, particularly it's around spirits, but we also see that in the beer sector, and will sort of play some role in offsetting some of the volume decline we've seen in beverages like beer, for example.
We're not out of the pandemic yet, of course, and further risks could come along in the autumn with the chance of a possible new outbreak. And the government, of course, having suggested vaccine passports could be required to go into pubs. How would the sector cope with that challenge?
The vaccine passport issue is a very contentious one, and I think there's a lot of debate raging in the press, in the media, and in the political circles as we speak. So clearly, arguments on both sides of the debate. But on one hand, it does keep the businesses open, and it could also incentivize much of the younger generation to take up more vaccines as we go along, which I think is one of the bottlenecks some countries in Europe are facing, especially. On the other hand, there's a debate around personal choice, some social issues around inclusion, etc. And one thing more from a hospitality sector, from an operator standpoint, it does open up several challenges in terms of more checks, perhaps more staff at the doors, and more cost of compliance, which again is a rather unwelcome prospect for the sector at this time.
Thanks so much for joining us. That was Raam, Retail and Consumer Sector Lead at S&P Global Ratings. Well, before I go, here are some of the top stories in the sector. Britain's Sky News is reporting that Prime Minister Boris Johnson will host top business leaders on Thursday to discuss those staff shortages caused by the government's Track and Trace app, which has forced millions of workers to self-isolate and forced companies to pare back services. Business leaders have been calling on the government to bring forward plans to allow fully vaccinated workers who have been pinged by the app to take a test instead of self-isolating. Heathrow Airport and Britain's main airlines have urged the government to open up to vaccinated passengers or face more job losses. Strict rules, which the government has changed with little or no notice, have meant passenger levels at Heathrow are still about 20 to 25% of pre-pandemic levels. That compares with 50% at European airports. Heathrow and industry body Airlines UK want quarantine to be scrapped for fully vaccinated travellers from the United States and the European Union, and called on the government to make the changes at its next travel review later this week. And finally, COVID certificates are now required at the entrance of restaurants and gyms on the Spanish resort island of Tenerife. As cases rose in the Canary Islands, the regional government decided to put the biggest island in the Spanish archipelago at the top level of coronavirus alert. Tenerife has made it mandatory for customers over 18 years old wanting to go inside restaurants and gyms to show the COVID-19 vaccine passport, a negative test or proof they've already had the disease. The measure caused confusion among businesses already struggling to make a living with the reduced number of tourists.
I think the rules that they put in place are fine. What happens is that we are the ones who are going to have to apply them, and we are not the police. I don't know how we are going to be able to carry it out. People must be civic-minded and reciprocate when we ask them for the certificate, but it's not up to us.
And that's your roundup of the British hospitality sector. I'm Elena Casas, and this is Reuters.